Hey everyone, very glad to have you on board for our first module of content. And in this module, I'm going to be talking a little bit about broad themes, a broad overview of the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about throughout the semester in this course. I think that an important thing to keep in mind in this course is that it's a cross-listed course, which means that we'll be drawing on content from both political science and media and communication studies. If you're the kind of person who maybe comes from a poly background and you feel like you don't have a lot of exposure to the kind of theory and concepts in media studies, that's fine. That's certainly something that you'll be able to interact with perhaps for the first time and learn something valuable from. If you're an MCS student, of course, and you have less of an understanding of the political sphere, maybe you haven't been paying much attention to politics in recent times, that's totally fine as well. I think that regardless of your major or your background in the course, you're going to be able to leverage, I think, some unique insights in terms of understanding what's going on, essentially, in this course. You don't need to be a politics junkie, and you certainly don't need to be somebody with a tremendous amount of background in media, to say nothing of media sort of production experience either. That's not a prerequisite of this course whatsoever. So all are welcome, and hopefully we'll all learn from each other as we go through this course. I want to talk a little bit about the big picture today, just very briefly, kind of set the stage for the different topics that we'll be studying throughout the semester. And I know certainly if you go to the syllabus, which I encourage you to read thoroughly so you can complete the syllabus homework, if you go through that, you'll be able to see the whole schedule for the course and the list of specific topics we'll be talking through from week 1 to the end of the semester. It may, as you're looking through this, it may kind of strike you that this is a very broad course and it covers a lot of ground. And certainly that's on purpose. I talk to a lot of my colleagues, my friends and colleagues who are at other universities, people who I attended graduate school with, people that I've met, throughout my time in the discipline, people at schools like Wake Forest and Clemson and, schools up in Pennsylvania. I've talked to a lot of people about how to design this course because I'm very interested in how other media politics scholars conceive of an intro to sort of political media. And I've been very, interested to see that everyone seems to do it a little bit differently, which is quite telling of the fact that this is an incredibly a broad field with a lot going on in it. I mean, of course, anytime you're putting together a Venn diagram that contains political science and media communication studies, like two entire fields, that overlap is going to be quite large. And so, some of my colleagues will often structure this course with a little more focus, where they'll make this really about kind of one or two of the three things that we're generally going to be talking about throughout this course. And so I've chosen to do it as more of a survey. And so that, I think, is something that provides us with certain benefits because you get to see a big picture of the whole field, and in some cases some drawbacks, mostly in that we only really have a week to talk about each of these topics. But my hope is that as we go through these topics, you'll see that they start to build on one another. And so we'll start to develop proficiency and understanding how each of these things are linked together. Speaking of linkage, the first part of the course is really focused on media institutions. And so by institutions, I'm essentially using a political science term by talking about sort of the formal and informal rules and arrangements that make up these media units that produce content or that interact in the media sphere. Many of these you might think of as being sort of legacy media institutions, and sort of journalistic outlets. But of course, those media institutions can be quite broadly defined in today's environment. My focus in the first part is to think about these institutions as a special kind of institution, that is a linkage institution. And by that, I really am talking about an institution that serves as the go-between between the mass public and elites, which are occupying various positions of power in government and in political parties. We want to understand how media function as sort of this go-between, this agent that passes information back and forth. And so, linkage institutions might help the elites understand what the mass public are thinking at any given moment about a topic. Similarly, of course, and perhaps even more important for democracy, these institutions also help to inform the public on what the heck these elites are doing at any given point so that we might be able to hold them to account when we vote in democratic elections. And so in a democracy, linkage institutions are foundational, but we can't assess their performance or understand how they're doing those jobs unless we understand what the media institutions are that exist in America today, how they're regulated, or not regulated, as it turns out, and especially how they actually do their jobs on a granular level, on a day-to-day basis, how journalists function, and how sort of more amateur kind of media creators function on a daily basis to convey content back and forth between these two channels. So that's really part one of the course, is thinking about media as institutional kind of actors, and how they serve that linkage role. The second part of the course is really not really about linkage so much when I talk about institutional interactions, but rather about these media institutions, both legacy media and more sort of modern media institutions, and how they might both come in conflict with or sometimes cooperate with both candidates and incumbents, so political creatures. So I often think about this like a big fish tank or like an ocean or something, where you've got all these different kinds of aquatic life swimming around together in this teeming ecosystem that is the media environment. So we want to know about how candidates and incumbents interact. In some cases, trying to put pressure on media institutions, and in some cases trying to even dominate media institutions or co-opt them or bend them to their will. And maybe how media institutions also nevertheless exploit weaknesses of candidates and incumbents to assert power over them as well. So in this kind of battleground of the media environment, we want to know how these different institutions interact. So that'll be kind of the focus of part two. It'll lead to hopefully some very interesting questions about where we stand today in terms of linkage, knowing what we do know about those interactions. Finally, and certainly not least, right? This is a topic that I'm fascinated by. This is a topic that I tend to study more directly in my own, political science research that I conduct, sort of on an ongoing basis. I'm really interested in political psychology and in voting behavior, and specifically how citizens conceive of the world around them, given that they are also swimming around in this kaleidoscopic, confusing, oversaturated media environment. I want to know what kinds of signals media send to citizens, how they receive them, how they process them psychologically, and then how they turn those kinds of signals into action. And so part three, suffice it to say, is a really important one, and we'll be spending a lot of time thinking about those topics, and certainly about how we conceive of the citizen today in our democracy. So that's really the overview of the course from a thematic perspective. But I think another way to put this, to sort of introduce the course, is to ask some big questions. The first question is to think about media politics, that is kind of the current state of affairs that we're in which we think about our politics as being inextricably saturated by media and linked to media and sort of co-opted or part of media today. We want to know that the answer to the question, what constitutes a healthy media politics? That is to say, if our politics is inevitably mediated, how do we have a healthy version of that? What does a healthy version of that even look like? Is it possible to have a healthy version of that? And certainly by holding a mirror up to our own current politics in our discussions, we'll hopefully arrive at a good answer to that big question. The second one is, I think, a corollary to that first question, which is to ask whether our journalistic institutions, that is, both the legacy institutions and sort of new media, how they might be fulfilling or failing to fulfill the role of the fourth estate. And by that I mean fulfilling that linkage role that we were talking about earlier. We want to know, as the media landscape changes, as the sort of motivations and profitability of different media change, and as the technology of media, the actual media, by that I mean the mediums, right? as the medium changes, how also do those institutions both, maybe succeed or fail at fulfilling that fourth estate role? Third, I want to know about power, right? That's the most foundational political science question that you can get to. Who's powerful in media spheres today, and how do we know? How do we characterize power? How do we conceptualize it? How do we measure it, from an empirical perspective as social scientists? And if we do have a way to measure it, can we actually arrive at an answer to that question, or is it ephemeral and constantly changing? And corollary to that question is the all-powerful question of who sets the agenda. That is, who gets to determine what we're talking about, on any given moment. So those are some really big overarching questions for the course that hopefully will set you thinking a little bit as we look forward to the first course meeting, in which case we'll be meeting each other a little bit and getting a chance to establish some of our priors, having kind of an open-ended discussion about where we see the state of media politics today before we get into that literature and really start to think hard about what political science and media studies together tell us about what we know scientifically about this situation. So again, I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday for our class meeting. And until then, I wish you a happy first week. Welcome back.